Hello everyone, welcome back to DataBreach. Once again, we will be diving into the secured files of the SCP Foundation. And today I have acquired 5 more files for your listening pleasure. I hope you enjoy learning about these anomalous entities, because I really enjoy digging through the Foundation system. And this is a nice excuse to indulge my curiosity. And yours as well. These files, as always, are confidential and not to be taken lightly. So prepare yourself for another trip into the hidden world that exists right around you. I love walking through the woods. The scenery, the sounds, the dense forest casting a shadow overhead as you venture forward. It creates a great sense of wonder and adventure that you hope will never end. Now, sometimes you get lost, turned around, and you may trip and fall. But that's all part of the adventure. An adventure that seems like it's been going on for days. And this fog is getting thicker. Why does none of this look familiar anymore? It looks like we've entered SCP-416. SCP-416 is an oblong area of forest located in a redacted location with redacted coordinates. It displays remarkable spatial anomalies, the most notable of which is that once you enter, it is impossible to leave if you are on foot. In fact, the only personnel that was ever able to escape SCP-416 had to be airlifted out by an aerial reconnaissance team. Now, from the air, this stretch of forest looks identical to the surrounding coniferous forests. But once you are inside, there are trees and plant life from different regions that should not be able to flourish here, with no evidence of how they even got there. All observations have indicated that this area is also devoid of all animal, fungal, and insect life. And personnel who have been deployed inside 416 claim that the entire area was continuously overcast in fog, despite satellites seeing no evidence for this. On a redacted date, local geographical surveyors reported a sudden seismic event coming from this area. The Foundation was alerted after surveyors reported anomalous topological features. D-Class personnel were fitted with GPS trackers and tasked with walking across the entire area of SCP-416. Things seemed to be working out all right at first, with D-Class stating they were maintaining a constant speed. However, their movement speed showed a constant decrease relative to the size of SCP-416 as they went further in. And because of this, they were never able to even reach the center. The D-Class personnel seemed very confused with their progress, or the lack thereof. They had not deviated from their path or backtracked at all. Once inside SCP-416, the area it takes up is seemingly infinite, and any D-Class personnel that was forced to endure prolonged stays inside SCP-416 have developed a wide variety of mental instabilities, including depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, catatonia, hallucinations, and psychosis. In order to contain the anomalous effects and control any civilian interaction, it is essential that SCP-416 be sequestered from the public, with restricted foot access and a no-fly zone implemented within 5 kilometers from the boundaries measured by the first observation team. However, the true border is not fully established, and a team of physicists assigned to analyze the topographical anomalies associated with SCP-416 have concluded that it appears to be the 3-dimensional intersection of a 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifold with the surface of Earth. Research is still being conducted to determine what force maintains this intersection, Most speculations are that it has something to do with the object or objects at the true center of SCP-416. As the research continues, it is noted that SCP-416 is being considered as a storage location for several movable safe and Euclid-class anomalies. Any form of auditory experience is followed with a warning telling you not to turn the volume up too high. The fear of hearing damage and loss is understandable. It's a direct form of communication for so many around the world. But how are you going to hear the gentle notes, or the quiet ambiance, or the softer cadence of a voice? Are you even listening anymore? Can you hear me? Stop listening to SCP-1414 and pay attention before it's too late. SCP-1414 is a radio with a cassette deck and a CD player. It's all made out of the standard material. The cassette deck, CD player, and tuner dial, however, are all non-functional, seemingly just there for decoration. However, all forensic examinations have revealed no differences between SCP-1414 and other radios of the same make or model. What makes SCP-1414 so special is that it manifests 4 distinct anomalies when in use, all of which are assumed to be linked to one another. The first anomaly that SCP-1414 displays is that it responds to speech. Anytime after SCP-1414 has its power supply interrupted and then restored, the first human to speak a command to it will become an instance of SCP-1414-1 and be considered its owner. As a result, SCP-1414 will change stations and increase or decrease volume upon SCP-1414-1's request. The commands don't all have to be verbal, but commands will only be received if they are from SCP-1414-1. And the formats that SCP-1414 can interpret commands include, but are not limited to, muffled speech, voice synthesizers, as long as they're being used by SCP-1414-1, sign language, mechanically assisted speech, writing, semaphore flags, and even messages relayed by a third party through Morse code in the form of clapping. All experiments with a third party involved show that SCP-1414 can determine whether the command was made by the third party or originated from SCP-1414-1. The second anomaly shows up in the broadcasts of SCP-1414. It appears that any station SCP-1414-1 requests will be received and broadcasted, including private telecommunications and television audio, from anywhere on the planet, regardless of its frequency, source location, or signal strength. SCP-1414 is also able to receive broadcasts enclosed within a Faraday cage. And upon being given an ambiguous request, SCP-1414 will play the broadcast with the closest physical point of origin, regardless of the signal strength. It is noted that SCP-1414's ability to parse natural language is the result of the interaction between the first 2 anomalous properties it displays, and it is not a separate anomaly on its own. The third anomaly involves the volume of SCP-1414. If the volume is ever set higher than 6, either by physically adjusting the volume knob or by a request from SCP-1414-1, then SCP-1414-1 will gradually become deaf to any sound not originating from SCP-1414. After approximately 9 minutes of listening to SCP-1414 at a volume of 7, SCP-1414-1 will be deaf to any external sound that is not louder than SCP-1414. And after 24 minutes of uninterrupted listening with the volume set to 7, SCP-1414-1 will be deaf to any external sound, regardless of how loud it is. This induced deafness will continue even after SCP-1414 has been unplugged. It has been noted to persist in D-Class personnel for 8 months, and is reasonably assumed as permanent. There have yet to be tests to determine the effects of setting the volume higher than 7. So for now, these effects are just speculations. However, the nature of SCP-1414's induced deafness does not seem to be physical or neurological in origin, and all post-mortem examination of subjects has shown all relevant structures to be intact. Furthermore, any instances of SCP-1414-1 that were surgically deafened after exposure reported they were still able to perceive the content of the broadcast SCP-1414 has played for them. The final anomaly is a funny safety precaution. SCP-1414 is capable of unplugging itself from electrical sockets, and will do so exerting up to as much as 5 Gs of force. It will do this whenever continuous use has caused its internal temperature to reach 35 degrees Celsius, and it will resist being plugged back in until it has cooled down. This is in accordance with standard safety guidelines for electrical appliances, and personnel have been advised to never force the plug back in. Containment for SCP-1414 is simple. It is held in a 3 meter by 3 meter soundproof room. SCP-1414 is not to be unplugged or have its volume set higher than 6, unless it is being done in accordance with a test. This next file will come with a warning. Some of the effects of this anomalous item will be concerning for most, and uncomfortable or disgusting to others. At first, it might seem like something so simple in description, but what it brings about is something truly horrific. So if you are squeamish, and body horror and mutilation is not something you can stomach, I recommend skipping ahead. However, if I have, at the same time, ignited your curiosity, you are welcome to stay. After all, knives can be pretty fun. Just don't accidentally cut yourself with SCP-1509. SCP-1509 is a bladed weapon that is similar to an Indonesian parang. It is approximately 63 centimeters in length, with a steel blade that is 48 centimeters in length and 11 millimeters thick at its widest point. The metal of this blade also appears partially tarnished. This blade was recovered with a wooden sheath, which is believed to be carved in a shape resembling a bird, possibly a cockatoo. The handle is also believed to be a later replacement of the original hilt. At first glance, SCP-1509 does not seem to possess any anomalous properties. However, once its blade is used to injure a human being, which would become the subject of SCP-1509, the wound it caused will display anomalous spatial distortion, and any exploration of the wound will show that it has an unidentifiable, large, and possibly infinite depth. This phenomenon will only occur from an outside inspection of the wound. The subject does not seem to be affected adversely by this anomaly, and the anomaly will not appear in any medical imaging. It is also noted that any foreign objects placed inside the wound and abandoned will disappear if they are placed any further into the wound than the wound should physically be able to penetrate. And depending on the type of wound inflicted by SCP-1509, one of two further anomalous effects will occur, referred to as Effect 1509-1 and Effect 1509-2. Effect 1509-1 typically occurs if the wound caused by SCP-1509 is in an extremity or is less than 7 centimeters in width. Initially, the wound will heal extremely slowly, with a blood flow that is significantly lower than you'd expect from a wound that size. Within 3 hours of being cut by SCP-1509, the wound will release a group of pharaoh ants. The amount usually ranges from 1 to 15. Upon examinations, these ants appear within the wound and crawl towards the opening ceaselessly from the point of their appearance. But the source of these ants has yet to be discovered, and these ants do not seem to possess any anomalous properties. Upon exiting the wound, they will attempt to move as far away from the subject as possible. The reason for this is still unknown. All ants discharged from the wound will be considered instances of SCP-1509-1, and after a period of 12 to 18 hours following the injury, the wound will begin to heal at an accelerated rate until it is fully closed. It is at this point that Effect 1509-1 appears to cease. Effect 1509-2 occurs when SCP-1509 inflicts a wound on the torso, neck, upper arms, or thighs that is greater than 7 centimeters in width. Although the effect can occur on rare occasions in other bodily locations, which have suffered a wound from SCP-1509 that is sufficient in size. Just like Effect 1509-1, the wound will heal very slowly and display a significantly lower amount of blood loss than you would normally expect from a wound this size. However, that is the only similarity. Within 3 hours of being cut, the subject will feel nauseous, complaining of unpleasant sensations of movement from within the area of the wound. Over the next hour, these sensations will grow more intense and become acutely painful to the subject, who will typically react with panic to these events. Once the subject begins to feel pain from these sensations, Effect 1509-2 enters its final stage. Over a period of 20 and 180 minutes, an instance of SCP-1509-2 will force its way out of the wound, apparently propelled by peristalsis. SCP-1509-2 is a collective designation for the human beings which are created or produced by Effect 1509-2. All instances vary in size, apparent physical age, gender, ethnicity, and most other physical differentiators. Upon emerging, most instances will be covered in a thin membrane similar to an amnion and a clear fluid. Typically, an instance of SCP-1509-2 will be unconscious and immobile but alive. However, certain instances will emerge fully conscious and will physically attempt to speed up the process. After emerging from the wound, these instances will, however, fall unconscious. This process significantly widens the wound and causes the subject extreme pain. Instances of SCP-1509-2 show anomalous levels of flexibility during this process, being able to pass through wounds which should not be able to accommodate their size. Effect 1509-2 is universally fatal to the subject. However, if the subject does survive the massive trauma caused by this process, they will quickly lapse into unconsciousness, which is followed by their death. Instances of SCP-1509-2 are anatomically and genetically identical to normal humans. And each instance of SCP-1509-2 claims to be, shares memories, and is genetically identical to a deceased person familiar with the subject who has died within the past 30 years for reasons other than old age. If a wound is made by SCP-1509 on a subject that has committed murder, manslaughter, or has similarly been directly responsible for the death of a human being, the instance of SCP-1509-2 that is produced is typically one of their victims. It is noted that no instances of SCP-1509-2 will be able to recall anything following their death, and anything prior to them gaining consciousness following their expulsion from the wound. SCP-1509 is kept in a secure storage locker at Storage Site 8. Access to SCP-1509 is restricted to testing and preservation work. Any personnel who have suffered minor wounds as a result of SCP-1509 are to report to the on-site medical facility immediately, where they are to be kept under observation. Any subjects discharged from the wound are to be contained by medical staff. All instances of SCP-1509-1 are to be contained by medical staff and destroyed. Any person injured with SCP-1509 is to be kept under observation until the wound has healed over, and an attending staff physician who has been briefed on the effects of SCP-1509 has given their signed permission to release the subject. In any case of non-Foundation personnel being injured by SCP-1509, all subjects must be administered amnestics before being released back into the general population. In the case of any major or fatal injuries arising from the mishandling of SCP-1509, the subject is to be moved to a secure medical facility within 30 minutes of receiving the injury. They are then to be sedated or restrained till the effects of SCP-1509 have ceased, at which point the body is then incinerated. Instances of SCP-1509-2 created during this process are to be immediately contained and interrogated. If an instance of SCP-1509-2 becomes violent, staff are permitted to terminate the instance immediately. Following the interrogation, the instance may be dealt with at the discretion of the current Level 2 staff member overseeing SCP-1509. Previous instances of SCP-1509-2 have been dealt with in the following manners: immediate termination, recruitment as D-Class personnel, indefinite detention, and being dosed with amnestic before being released into the general population. SCP-1509 was recovered from the personal collection of an antiquities collector, who had apparently collected it from an archaeological excavation somewhere in Indonesia. Based on the information he provided, and from independent investigations undertaken by the Foundation, it is believed that SCP-1509 was used as punishment for murderers by an unknown society living in pre-Islamic Indonesia, and strict rules existed for the correct implementation of SCP-1509, restricting its use to criminals and elderly or extremely sick volunteers. The society which made SCP-1509 appears to have had a strong association between ants, cockatoos, and the concept of death and rebirth. The loss of someone is painful, and the desire to see them again and tie up loose ends to bring closure to the relationship is strong. Sometimes, the ways people go about getting closure is not always safe. Seances, Ouija boards, psychics, and other things around the same vein can be pretty dangerous, and the results will always vary. But what if I told you, you can see the one you've lost again? you may talk to them and get that closure you need. However, if the circumstances are not right, you will lose all memory of this person. Would you take that risk and engage with SCP-4551? SCP-4551 is an ornate iron funeral bell, which was constructed during the late 1300s in Rosefair, Scotland. When SCP-4551 is rung, it will produce an E-flat note in the third octave, which will cause an illusion to appear in front of the ringer for up to 10 minutes. This illusion is considered an instance of SCP-4551-1, and the illusion appears to be an incorporeal and partially translucent figure that will have the physical appearance identical to a deceased individual whom the ringer had an interpersonal relationship with. SCP-4551 was originally discovered in Rosefair, Scotland, which is a secluded and autonomous village located near Edinburgh. Originally, SCP-4551 was used as a dead bell, which was a type of bell used by the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. It was used to drive evil spirits away during funerals and offer comfort to the dead. SCP-4551 was now used by the citizens in the village for religious ceremonies and festivals. According to a senior member of the village, Father George Albert, SCP-4551 was considered to be a holy item and was used to wish for harvests and to celebrate and revere the dead members of the community. They even held a special ceremony called the Ghost of God. This was conducted to remove the rust from SCP-4551 and to prevent deceased members of the community from being forgotten by the population of the village. This ceremony required a dying member of the community to baptize the bell, and during this ceremony, a special song was sung. Man, come and see how all dead men shall die. When that comes bad and bare, we have nothing when we away fare. All that we care for is worms, except for that which we do for God's sake. We have nothing ready but God's ghost, and a last memory. On April 9, 2005, Father George Albert took SCP-4551 into Edinburgh for a Mass, which was being held for the recently deceased Catholic Pope John Paul II. When SCP-4551 was rung, 23 instances of SCP-4551-1 appeared. This action caused the Foundation to confiscate SCP-4551 at the ceremony. Amnestics were also given to Father Albert and the whole congregation. Once in the hands of the Foundation, more detailed observations of the anomalous properties of SCP-4551 were made. The following has been observed during interactions between the ringer and instances of SCP-4551-1. The ringer maintains that SCP-4551-1 is the soul of the deceased individual, and ringers report that SCP-4551-1 converse about past memories shared between the ringer and SCP-4551-1. It has also been noted that an SCP-4551-1 illusion will engage in enduring behavior, such as giving compliments and easing doubts when emotionally close to the ringer. However, it will engage in negative and hostile behavior when emotionally distant from the ringer. Observations have also shown that the time frame in which the illusion persists for is based on the decibel rating that was produced when SCP-4551 was rung. If it was less than 40 decibels, there will be no effect. At 40 decibels, the illusion will persist for 4 minutes. At 60 decibels, the illusion will persist for 6 minutes. At 80 decibels, the illusion will persist for 8 minutes. At 100 decibels, the illusion will persist for 10 minutes. And anything over 100 decibels will also have no effect. There were 5 tests conducted with SCP-4551. And currently it seems that SCP-4551 will summon instances of SCP-4551-1, regardless of the Ringer's place of birth. The first test was conducted on Dr. Wellington, and the identity of SCP-4551-1 was that of her grandfather. This interaction lasted 10 minutes, in which her grandfather asked her questions about school and how her day-to-day life has been so far. The second test was conducted on Dr. Belclair, and the identity of SCP-4551-1 was that of the doctor's childhood dog, Honey. This interaction lasted 6 minutes, in which they played catch with a tennis ball in Lab A51, and then spent the latter time on a short walk. It is noted that the dog let out a sad whimper when it was time to go. The third test was conducted on Dr. Lee, and the identity of SCP-4551-1 was that of his ex-girlfriend. The interaction lasted only 2 minutes, in which Dr. Lee apologized for flaws in the relationship and stated that he had always loved her, and she berated him about dwelling on their relationship, having never loved him as much as he thought, and never wanting to see him again. The fourth test was conducted on D-Class Personnel 5192, and the identity of SCP-4551-1 was that of one of his murder victims. This interaction lasted 8 minutes, during which D-5192 confessed his guilt to his victim for the murder charge, but she refused to forgive him, stating that he would have to live with this. The fifth and final test was conducted on D-Class Personnel 1072, and the identity of SCP-4551-1 was that of her father. This interaction lasted 10 minutes, in which they discussed her childhood, and her father apologized for his lack of involvement with the family. D-1072 accepts the apology, with both of them reconciling in the end. Rust has been documented occurring on SCP-4551, with about 3 square millimeters of rust occurring daily. It generally forms around the base of the bell. Because of this, there was a test done, aptly called the Rust Test, where D-Class Personnel 4515 rung the bell while the rust was present. And within an hour of the interaction, D-4515 had forgotten the entire experience, even forgetting ever seeing SCP-4551 before. And along with that, all memories of D-4515's mother were lost, to the point where D-4515 couldn't even recognize her from photographs. Because of this, it is cited that SCP-4551 behaves as a rudimentary amnestic, able to produce an effect in which the ringer will completely forget the memory of the individual summoned during a rusted ringing of SCP-4551. Any family members and those related are not affected. Currently, the only side effects are clinical depression and periods of muteness. It is currently unknown what will happen if SCP-4551 is rung when it is fully rusted over. The Prayer of Rosafar, which is a holy book from the region, describes the rust effect of SCP-4551 in the following manner. Man, come and see that such a memory is viewable for such a bright moment. But alas, my son, my daughter, for all of God's mighty miracles, this has such a price to pay. From your fathers, from your mothers, dead and buried, the devil came for their blood, now stained on our bell. Let one think, has the memory deserved bloodshed, agony, and suffering? Our God only knows, only judge, when our Holy Ghost of our loved ones becomes blessed true. Our sense of reality is fragile, and we tend to reject things we can't understand. However, sometimes we are also fascinated by them. The world around us can bend and break, both figuratively and literally. And the gap between dimensions can sometimes be as thin as tracing paper, giving a light glimpse into another world. But you don't always need to see things to learn about them. For instance, you are listening to me, and I am reading a file. But we're not delving into another dimension. Not yet. SCP-5402 isn't even here. SCP-5402 is a humanoid entity resembling a 14-year-old Caucasian male. He wears a newsboy flat cap and dresses in an attire consistent with youth fashion in the early 20th century. SCP-5402 possesses the ability to instantaneously translocate through dimensions and across geographical locations, and it does this with apparent ease. SCP-5402 sells and distributes a particular black and white newspaper called the Cosmic Current. These papers are all considered instances of SCP-5402-1. The ink seems non-anomalous, and there is usually a crossword puzzle on the back page, often with non-existent vocabulary or phrases. SCP-5402 appears childishly naive and unaware of its abnormal nature and the irregularity of its behavior. And it has been determined that interdimensional newspaper deliveries are regarded as a legitimate profession in its home reality. SCP-5402 will often confuse customs between realities and may on occasion speak in non-existent languages or offer prices in non-existent currencies. It is presumed that SCP-5402 is capable of surviving within all realities and regions detailed in SCP-5402-1. It has also demonstrated no regard for extreme altitudes, radical changes of temperature, or changes in atmospheric composition. The entries in SCP-5402-1 pertain to stories and events from other dimensions, and regularly presents activity that would be considered anomalous in this reality. SCP-5402-1 similarly uses vocabulary that is non-existent in our reality, and will sporadically include entries with words, phrases, or languages that have varied mimetic influence on its readers, primarily invoking an urge to purchase an advertised product or service, or, on rare occasions, invoking physical or mental trauma. The articles within SCP-5402-1 refer to an indeterminate number of realities, including our own baseline reality. SCP-5402 uses two main venues for selling instances of SCP-5402-1. The first is selling issues in public squares. The second is on a newspaper delivery route, while riding a non-anomalous bicycle. In either case, SCP-5402 will attempt to sell instances of SCP-5402-1 for costs running from 3 to 6 US cents. In instances where SCP-5402 delivers papers, it appears to collect a requisite subscription cost from any physical or digital accounts of its recipients. Since SCP-5402 has never been cited physically withdrawing the subscription cost, it is believed that it possesses an additional anomalous ability, allowing it to withdraw money remotely. On June 6, 2020, SCP-5402 was cited in New York City. It was attempting to sell instances of SCP-5402-1 in Times Square. Agent Ramirez was already present in the area at the time and succeeded in reporting SCP-5402 to the Foundation and approaching it before any instances of SCP-5402-1 were sold. This led to the only successful interview with SCP-5402. In this interview, Agent Ramirez ended up purchasing all the instances of SCP-5402-1 for a modest price of $3.07. But no questions were really answered. SCP-5402 stated that it didn't know how to explain its ability to go through dimensions as it pleased, and that its mother had said to never tell strangers where it was from. Sadly, the interview was cut short when the bell rang in a nearby chapel, signaling 3 o'clock. It was at this point that SCP-5402 stated it had to go before dematerializing before anything else could be done. The following Sunday, Agent Ramirez discovered an instance of SCP-5402-1 on the welcome mat to his apartment. Upon opening SCP-5402-1, he was blinded by the mimetic influences of an advertisement for an establishment called Infernal Pizzeria. Agent Ramirez reported having had his vision replaced with the image of a non-human entity during this period. When asked to describe the image, he stated, "You know God? Yeah, the opposite of that." Following the incident with Agent Ramirez, Dr. Stein submitted a request for use of force as necessary to contain SCP-5402 and to prevent the dissemination of SCP-5402-1. The request was granted. On July 5th, 2020, SCP-5402 was sighted in Moscow, attempting to sell instances of SCP-5402-1 in Red Square to passers-by. Agent Reynolds fired a carfentanil-based tranquilizer directly at SCP-5402. The Foundation had taken great care of going unnoticed in its attempt to contain SCP-5402. However, right when the round was fired, SCP-5402 instantaneously dematerialized. The tranquilizer cartridge was recovered 13 meters behind where SCP-5402 stood, and upon close inspection, there were small amounts of skin cells on the front 1.4 millimeters of the needle. It was then determined that SCP-5402 translocated precisely when the needle had made contact with its skin. On September 12, 2020, reports were received in Hamburg, Germany, of SCP-5402 on a paper route. All acquisitions of instances of SCP-5402-1 ceased temporarily, so the Foundation could pursue SCP-5402. Agents deployed aerosol canisters of a translucent paralytic agent into SCP-5402's path. However, the paralytic failed to take effects, and after approximately 43 seconds of exposure, SCP-5402 became aware of the Foundation's presence and proceeded to give a passing greeting, demonstrating no signs of awareness to their attempts at containment or any other irregularities. There are currently no known means of containing SCP-5402, and given that it will only demanifest once all instances of SCP-5402-1 have been disseminated, attempts to contain SCP-5402 are not to be made. Members of the Foundation, aptly called Newsies, are to remain on standby in majorly populated areas every Sunday, prepared for immediate transport and response. The first priority for the Newsies is the confiscation of any and all manifestations of SCP-5402-1, and any recipients of SCP-5402-1 are to be given psychological evaluation for any mimetic influences before being applied a Class A amnestic. However, If the subject is determined to be under mimetic influences, treatment is to be dictated at the discretion of a level 3 or higher researcher. Due to the elusive nature of SCP-5402, mobile task forces are not to attempt to locate it while copies of SCP-5402-1 are left unrecovered. If contact with SCP-5402 is ever established, personnel's first priority is to inquire about the nature of its employment and its anomalous properties. And, if offered, they are to purchase an instance of SCP-5402-1. However, no personnel is permitted to read an issue of SCP-5402-1 until it is approved by a level 3 or higher researcher. There is a redacted site for the Foundation that allocates 6 cents a week to a private account for a subscription to SCP-5402-1. There are to be no attempts to capture or interfere with SCP-5402 during these manifestations, unless they are authorized by level 3 or higher researcher. Well, it seems like that was our last file. What an interesting batch of anomalies. There are so many things out there, far beyond anything we can imagine, and the information in these files brings up some questions. How do you know that the Foundation never administered an amnestic to you? Are there any blank spots in your memory that seem out of place? Probably just a passing thought for a curious mind. Pay no attention to it. You shouldn't have anything to worry about. After all, if they did apply an amnestic, that means you survived. So many anomalies are still out there, and I'd love to know what you thought of these 5. So as always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have any files that you'd like me to read, put them there as well. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when the next audio log is out. And until then, wherever each and every one of you are, stay safe and stay curious.